He was small and thin and seemed to have a nearly supernatural connection with flight. Flight was all he talked about, all he lived for, all he ever wanted to do. As a college student, he paid for his own flying lessons, tried to join the British RAF, and enlisted as a flight cadet as soon as the Army Air Corps would have him. When he finally made it into combat, he shot down 5 enemy aircraft in his first 2 missions. For the next 2 years, it seemed like every time he went up, the enemy went down. With the end of the war in sight, he embarked on a mission that had a single goal: get enough kills to become the greatest American fighter ace of the war. Instead, he died in a battle that he never expected to fight, killed by an enemy that no one knew existed until almost 30 years later. He is Tommy McGuire, and he is a legend of air power. Thomas Buchanan McGuire, Jr. was born in Ridgewood, New Jersey on August 1, 1920. His father, Thomas Sr., was a dealer in luxury automobiles, and his mother, Polly, came from a family of wealth and social standing. He was tutored in art and culture, attended exclusive summer camps, and became something of a dandy. But he was also a daredevil who seemed willing to take huge risks simply to prove his courage.
On a dare, he dove into a swimming pool at the Ridgewood Country Club that was filled with snow. And he dove into the snow from a diving board and ended up getting badly skinned. Could have broken his neck.
His parents split when he was 10, and mother and only child moved from New Jersey to Sebring, Florida.
I think he was actually grateful when they moved to Florida because he was able to start anew. And I don't think there was any expectations for him to be the tough kid from Jersey. I think he affected a Floridian kind of dialect almost immediately. You would have a hard time imagining that McGuire was from New Jersey unless you knew it previously.
He was insulated from the Great Depression. Small, almost frail, McGuire played clarinet in the school marching band and seemed to love dressing up in the band's ridiculously fancy uniforms. He always had the nicest car in town, but drove it so wildly that most parents forbade their children from riding with him. Fastidiously dressed, always conscious of what those around him thought, McGuire was in fact considered something of a sissy. Always one to take up a challenge, in his senior year, McGuire went out for the football team.
And they decided they'd teach him a lesson, so they pummeled him for 2 or 3 days, and finally one of the kids on the team said, we've hit that kid with everything we've got, and he keeps coming back. He weighed about 130 pounds, and they said, he's going to take it as long as we give it out, so let's quit. So they quit trying to punish him, and he was one of the guys after that.
After graduating high school, McGuire attended Georgia Tech University, but dropped out after only 3 years to enlist as an aviation cadet. In July 1941, he reported to MacDill Field in Florida and later trained in Texas at a quasi-civilian contract school run by retired military pilots. He stood out immediately and was so passionate about flight that when the other cadets went into town, he'd remain on base, looking for someone, anyone, with whom to talk flying. The one time they did talk McGuire into going into town, he met a pretty girl from San Antonio named Marilyn Gosler. Nicknamed, for no apparent reason, Pudgy, Tommy and Marilyn took an almost immediate liking to each other.
One of the things about McGuire that's interesting is he was sheltered. I don't see a lot of interaction between he and females in high school. He's a very shy man. But he saw what he liked, and he was becoming more and more confident, and I think he was not allowed to let Marilyn go after that first date.
McGuire got his wings 2 months after the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and was shuffled to Florida for fighter training.
He just had a flat-out determination that he was going to be a leading ace.
McGuire requested a combat assignment, but was instead relegated to duty flying over the frozen tundra and icebound seas of Alaska. He and his fellow pilots patrolled for non-existent Japanese submarines and went gradually stir-crazy. One day, killing time in the abandoned weather station that served as their ready room, McGuire reverted to his high school form and started bragging about his daredevil exploits. McGuire's squadron flew P-39s, an underpowered, overweight tub of an airplane that was legendary for its lack of maneuverability. McGuire bragged that he had once done a loop in a P-39. No one believed him. Soon enough, bets were made, and McGuire was trudging out into the cold to prove his claim.
So he went up over the airport, and he did complete a loop in this airplane. And when he landed, he was ordered to report to his CO, and he wrote right in his logbook that he was restricted to the tent for 2 or 3 days because he had done this loop over the airfield.
Late in 1942, the Air Corps sent McGuire to Harding Field in Louisiana.
They were flying east, and they did not have the password for the day. They got caught up in a blizzard, and the people on the ground would not give them instructions, would not vector them into the field because they didn't have the password. So they ended up landing 5 P-39s in a frozen swamp. So he survived that.
McGuire eventually made it home. He married Marilyn, whom he hadn't seen in a year, in San Antonio. They moved to Mississippi, where McGuire was stationed for about 6 weeks before he shipped out to California to train in the airplane that would make him famous, the Lockheed P-38 Lightning. Since the outbreak of the war, Tommy McGuire had been requesting a combat assignment. Newly married and assigned to a 9-to-5 job in Mississippi, he wanted desperately to get into action. Word circulated among the landlocked pilots that the Air Corps was looking for volunteers to train in P-38s, and McGuire signed up. The P-38 is an interesting airplane. Nicknamed the Lightning, it seemed on paper the perfect aircraft for the war in Europe. It had a longer range than other fighters, was faster, and with 2 engines, tougher to knock down than most other fighters. However, in action over Europe, the P-38 proved much less effective than expected.
The P-38 got a bad reputation in Europe because the engine oil congealed, and they would have engines blow up, and some pilots went down just because the engines failed. So there were P-38s available to be sent to the South Pacific.
So the call went out for pilots to fly a plane with a nasty reputation. And though he had only been married for a few weeks, McGuire volunteered. It was, he knew, the shortest route to the battlefield. And McGuire had set a goal for himself that to others might have seemed ridiculous. He wanted to be the greatest fighter ace of them all. In March 1943, McGuire was ordered to report to the 49th Fighter Group, then based in Australia. He named his P-38 Pudgy, after the wife he barely knew, but he saw no combat with the 49th. He did, however, meet Lieutenant Richard Bong, who was the leading American ace at the time, a young farm boy closing in on Eddie Rickenbacker's record of 25 kills from World War I.
He was really jealous of Bong. He wanted to catch him, but Bong already had 17 or 18 victories by that time, and McGuire was untested. But he told the guys that he would catch Bong.
Not surprisingly, McGuire developed a reputation as a big talker. Transferred in August to the newly formed 475th Fighter Group, his incessant talk about flying and his own desire to be the greatest ace ever so alienated the other pilots that no one wanted to fly with McGuire. So, the most natural pilot in the unit was assigned the job of inspecting newly arrived aircraft to make sure they were combat ready.
That is where McGuire comes into his own. But McGuire was a sponge, and his abilities kept growing to such an extent that by August of 43, he is confident
The 475th moved to Port Moresby in New Guinea. On August 17th, McGuire ventured out into a real combat zone for the first time, but did not engage the enemy. The next day, attacking the Japanese airdrome at WWII, McGuire recorded 3 confirmed kills and hit 2 other enemy aircraft.
He had had gunnery training as part of his cadet training, and he happened to catch on to how all of this worked. And he was the master of what they called a deflection shot. He could visualize where this Japanese plane was going to be when the bullets got there, and he would fire ahead and above these planes so that the pull of gravity on the shots he had fired would bring the shots and the airplane, the target together, and he could fire from a half-mile away and hit a plane sometimes.
3 days later, in his second combat engagement, he knocked down 2 Japanese heroes. After 2 missions, he was an ace. It was not uncommon in New Guinea during that stage of the war for pilots to make ace in a mission or 2. Japanese aircraft seemed to arrive for battle in endless waves, and just keeping track of who killed what was a nearly impossible task. Ace or not, McGuire didn't slow down. He got his 10th kill in mid-October in fierce fighting over Oro Bay. The next day, with his own plane grounded for repairs, he took his commander's personal P-38 without permission and joined in another fierce fight. In full view of American ships below, he shot down 3 more Japanese fighters before being shot down himself. He bailed out, was hospitalized and off flight status for nearly 2 months, but never considered going home.
He was married to Marilyn for literally only weeks before he shipped out. And he missed her greatly, and they had a very touching relationship, but he felt an obligation to his men that exceeded everything else.
In December, he was promoted to captain and returned to flight. He quickly recorded 3 more kills and was promoted to operations officer for the 431st Squadron. With 16 kills in only 5 months, the skinny rich kid who talked too much had risen to the point where he actually rivaled Bong. And when his unit moved up to the Philippines, he started attracting the attention of newspaper reporters and the people back home.
McGuire was outspoken. He would sit around and talk to anybody. Bong was quiet. He was from a large family and was raised on a farm. McGuire was an only child and was an extrovert. So the reporters really crowded around McGuire for the interviews.
So the stage was set. The ace race, which had existed largely in McGuire's own mind, now captured the American imagination. And then something happened, something McGuire could do nothing to prevent. The Japanese Air Force disappeared. For 5 months, McGuire barely saw any Japanese aircraft. He flew hundreds of hours, going sometimes on 2 missions a day. It was as if the Japanese had simply vanished. And with them, so had McGuire's chances of becoming the greatest fighter pilot of them all. For 5 months, it seemed as if Tommy McGuire's war had ended. While leading ace Dick Bong took extended leave in the United States, McGuire made up no ground. The Air Corps, in recognition of his leadership abilities, promoted him to commanding officer of the 431st Squadron and moved him to Hollandia. In May, the Japanese returned, and McGuire scored a couple of quick kills. But as conscious as he was of his ambition to be the greatest fighter pilot, command was also changing him.
McGuire's first sergeant told me that McGuire used to agonize because here he was, a young man, 22 and a half, 23 years old, and he's having to sit down and write to the relatives of a pilot that's just died and tell them that he's sorry that they died and give a little bit of information about the circumstances and all. But he said that McGuire got distant from the men because of this, because he'd fly with a guy one day and he doesn't know, maybe he has to sit down that night and write a letter.
He insisted that new arrivals address him not as Tommy, but Major McGuire. He began to isolate himself more and more inside a circle of pilots he knew well. In June 1943, Charles Lindbergh arrived on a tour of the South Pacific that had been constructed in large measure to get the world's most famous aviator into combat. Lindbergh, who had plotted air routes across the Pacific for Pan American Airlines, taught the P-38 pilots how to squeeze hundreds of extra miles out of a tank of gas. The P-38 pilots, who were already routinely flying missions that lasted more than 4 hours, were less than enthusiastic about Lindbergh's formula for extending their missions by 2 hours.
But after the meeting, McGuire went to Charles Lindbergh and said, I don't know how the other people feel about this, but I feel like anything that would extend our range and might save some of my pilots' lives, that we ought to learn.
So Lindbergh went back to McGuire's squadron to teach the pilots how to maximize their plane's range, and he soon moved into McGuire's tent. The two flew missions together, and Lindbergh called McGuire the finest pilot he'd ever seen.
And they were naturals together. They both are charismatic. And Lindbergh thought the world of McGuire in the very short time that they spent together.
McGuire kept racking up kills, always with Bong in his sights. When Bong scored his 35th kill, the War Department decided the greatest ace of them all was more valuable as a propaganda tool than as a pilot. They took away Bong's plane and gave him the Congressional Medal of Honor.
After the ceremony, Bong said, it looks like I'm through. They have taken my airplane away. And McGuire said, come on over to our place. We have a plane for you anytime you want to fly. So Bong showed up over there, and they would go hunting together.
At 40 kills, the War Department sent Bong to the United States for a bond drive. McGuire saw his chance, but his quest to win the ace race took on a new flavor. It was competitive, yes, and McGuire was certainly inspired by the men of his unit, who took such pride in his accomplishments. He went out looking for Japanese aircraft, but couldn't find them. For weeks, he did not record a single kill.
He did become somewhat driven because he felt like he was never going to get an opportunity to score. He wanted to go home, and he felt like the best way to do that, and it would have guaranteed him swift passage, would have been to get 41 victories.
He could have grounded himself, but that would have been a betrayal of his men. So instead, he went up, looking for Japanese to kill, trying to get to the magic number 41, so that he too would be ordered home to sell war bonds. On Christmas Day, 1944, he downed 3 Japanese aircraft over Manila. The next day, again over Manila, he knocked down 4 more. The score, Bong 40, McGuire 38. Bong had not even made it home, and McGuire was going to pass him as the greatest ace.
They're down in the area in one of the tents down a line from mine, and I go down to say hello to Mac, and everybody's talking about basically, what do we have to do to get you 3? Where can we go? What can we do to get you 3?
McGuire was on the cusp of incredible fame. The Associated Press and New York Times had already written profiles of him, set to be published upon confirmation of his 41st kill. Together, the flyers cooked up a mission. Early on the morning of January 7th, 1945, McGuire and 3 other aircraft took off to hunt Japanese planes. The P-38s were heavily armed and loaded with extra fuel and dual belly tanks so they could range far and wide. The weather was gray and visibility limited. A couple of hours into the mission, a single Japanese plane flashed past the formation of P-38s.
They just turned as a precaution that he wouldn't turn and attack them. But McGuire ordered them to keep their wing tanks because he didn't think there was going to be combat.
He was wrong. The Japanese plane turned and started firing. At the same time, a second Japanese plane, unknown for decades after the action, stumbled on the scene and started firing as well. McGuire, hearing the distress calls of his wingman, turned toward the battle. What happened next, no one is sure. There are those who think a lucky shot killed McGuire in the cockpit. But it may be something easier than that. McGuire may have turned too sharply, either stalling his plane or causing its structure to fail.
McGuire's crew chief told me that every P-38 McGuire ever flew was bent out of true, that he actually bent the wings and popped rivets and that sort of thing, turning the plane in violent turns. So McGuire made one of these turns, but this was the wrong time to do it. He was at low altitude, at low flying speed, and he had the full fuel tanks. And he just didn't get away with it this time.
Whatever happened, whatever the ultimate cause of the crash, Tommy McGuire's death sent shockwaves through the Pacific theater. A hero who had seemed invincible was dead, and the effect on the morale of those who remained was palpable. Back home, his young wife was devastated. The husband she had barely known was gone. At the ceremony in Paterson, New Jersey, where Marilyn McGuire accepted her husband's posthumous Medal of Honor, a tall, familiar figure slipped quietly into the room. Charles Lindbergh had come to pay his respects. Charles Lindbergh, thought of as the greatest aviator of the time, took Tommy McGuire's widow aside to tell her what a great man she had been married to.
Clarence L. Kelly Johnson would be partially responsible for the financial latitude implied in the prototyping of the Model 22, which later would become world-renowned as the P-38 Lightning. The cutting-edge Lightning was a twin-edge, twin-boom, twin-tail interceptor pursuit aircraft that eventually became a pivotal combat aircraft in World War II. The design and engineering that went into the P-38 were the handiwork of aeronautical engineers Hibbard and Johnson, and the first example, the one-off XP-38, made its first flight on January 27, 1939. Secretly, a number of advanced features were being incorporated into the new fighter, including a significant structural revolution in which the aluminum skin of the aircraft was joggled, fitted, and flush riveted, a design innovation not called for in the Army specification, but one that would yield less aerodynamic drag and give greater strength with lower mass. As a result, the XP-38 was the first 400-mile-per-hour fighter in the world. It was flown by a USAAC AMC engineering test pilot, First Lieutenant Benjamin Scoville Ben Kelsey, who was a fighter project officer in the engineering division of the AMC and one of P-38's biggest supporters. In fact, he helped convince the USAAC to procure the type. In addition to the P-38 Lightning program, Lockheed Aircraft and its Vega Aircraft Corporation subsidiary, formerly the Air Rover Company, were busy building advanced trainers under license for North American Aviation. The Vega, Electra, and Super Electra airliners, and the Hudson, Ventura, and Harpoon bombers and patrol bombers. In 1939, Howard R. Hughes, Jr., billionaire and major stockholder in Trans World Airlines, TWA, put forth an industry-wide request for a 40-passenger transcontinental airliner with a range of 3,500 miles. The earlier Lockheed L-044 Excalibur design didn't fit the requirements, but lent itself to modification into what became the Lockheed L-049 Constellation. But like so many other aircraft manufacturers of that era, it was constantly looking for new business to survive and to keep its relatively small workforce intact. On order for fiscal year 1940 were 65 P-38 Lightnings and a single Lightning derivative designated XP-49. These aircraft, ordered by the then USAAC, were a mere handful to produce, and additional orders were highly sought after. The year 1941 proved much more lucrative due to the expanding wars in Europe and the Pacific. In 1941, military orders increased dramatically for Lockheed. After December 8, 1941, the date America declared war on Germany and Japan, the floodgates opened and combat and military transport aircraft soon began to stream off the Lockheed and Vega production lines. Between July 1, 1940 and August 31, 1945, the company produced no less than 19,077 aircraft for the war effort. This figure represented 6.6% of all U.S. production during that period and some 9% of the airframe weight total. By the end of World War II, Lockheed was the fifth largest manufacturer of aircraft in the U.S. The war catapulted Lockheed into the upper echelons of financially successful aircraft production companies. Accordingly, it was unable to indulge research and development initiatives that otherwise would have been all but impossible during more austere times.
He may be the only person in history who fell in love with flight because President Calvin Coolidge took a vacation. A baby-faced Swede who flew a trainer in a loop around the center span of the Golden Gate Bridge. He was a stunningly talented pilot. It was said of him that he thought more quickly in 3 dimensions than most people did in 2. His string of combat victories over New Guinea turned him into a national hero. He shot down an incredible 40 enemy aircraft before being removed from combat once and for all. A national treasure who could no longer be risked on the battlefield. When the endless cycle of parades and war bond rallies wore him down, he asked for and received assignment as a test pilot in the secret program that produced America's first combat jet. He is Richard Ira Bong, and he is a legend of air power. Richard Ira Bong was born September 24, 1920, in Superior, Wisconsin. Superior is a small town at the western tip of Lake Superior, and about as far north as you can be in Wisconsin without being in Minnesota. His father, Carl, had come to the United States from Sweden at the age of 7. He worked his way halfway across the continent before settling as a farmer in Poplar, Wisconsin, 20 miles to the southeast of Superior. Carl Bong married Dora Bryce and settled in to start a family. Richard was the first of their 9 children, a quiet, thoughtful boy who grew up hunting and fishing in the dense forests around his family's farm. Known from an early age as Dick, he was first taken with aviation at the age of 8, when President Calvin Coolidge decided to spend a summer vacation in Superior.
And every day the mail would be delivered by a courier, air courier, and Richard saw the plane going over to every day, and I think it just fascinated him, and I think that was the start of his love affair with aviation, and it just built from there.
When the presidential party left town, so did the air couriers, but aviation had made its impression on young Dick. He contented himself with building model airplanes and dreaming of the day when he would learn how to fly. He played basketball, baseball, and hockey. He was a fisherman and hunter, played clarinet in the school band, and was active in the local 4-H club. He was, like almost everyone else in Poplar, a Lutheran, and he sang tenor in the choir every Sunday morning at Bethany Lutheran Church. Poplar was a town so small that its high school only lasted 3 years. To complete his senior year and make himself eligible for college and the civilian pilot training program, he commuted 44 miles round trip every day to Superior. In 1938, he graduated 18th in a class of more than 400. He attended Superior State Teachers College and enlisted in the civilian pilot training program. That government-sponsored flight training system was designed to boost the number of experienced pilots in the United States. The government justified the program based on the growing need for airmail and commercial pilots. In reality, the government's main concerns were the wars that were brewing in Europe and Asia. There was going to come a time, military planners believed, when the United States would need a lot of pilots quickly. Bong earned his pilot's license in a Piper J3, and almost from the first showed a gift for aviation.
He had a knack for it, and he learned that through the pilot training programs he had been in college and afterwards, that he was just a natural pilot, and that was the word that everybody used to describe him in all of his pilot training programs. He was just a natural pilot. He loved it, and it became evident in the performance he turned in as a pilot.
In 1941, Bong enlisted in the Army Air Aviation Cadet Program. In May, he shipped out to far-off and exotic California. He did his primary flight training in a Stearman biplane outside Tulare. He caught on quickly and moved on to flying Vultee BT-13s, the famous Vultee vibrator at Garner Field in Taft.
He was, as I said, a natural pilot. He had natural skills, natural abilities, and in those days, you didn't get a whole lot of instructions.
Most of the pilots at Gardner simply flew, running up their hours and getting a feel for maneuvering in 3 dimensions. Bong quickly distinguished himself and was ordered to report for gunnery training. At Luke Field, near Phoenix, Arizona, he moved from the BT-13 to the AT-6, a single-engine fighter trainer that was smoother and more capable than the Vultees he'd been flying, but sluggish compared to real combat fighters. His gunnery trainer was Captain Barry Goldwater, the future senator and presidential candidate. Goldwater, a tough, precise teacher, said later that Bong was a talented pilot, and those years hunting with his Winchester rifle in Wisconsin had honed his shooting skills. But Bong really proved himself one afternoon in an informal, impromptu hassle high over Luke Field. Bong, flying an AT-6, squared off against a Czech pilot in a P-38. The dogfight should have been a mismatch. The P-38, after all, was much faster and more agile than the AT-6, and the Czech pilot had hundreds of hours more flight time than Bong. But no matter how the P-38 pilot maneuvered, he couldn't keep Bong off his tail. The two would square off, and in a few seconds, Bong would be closing in on the P-38 from behind. The Czech pilot, upon landing, pronounced Bong the best natural pilot he had ever seen. Bong was at Luke when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor in December 1941. Like the other pilots, he wanted into the war as soon as he could get there. A month later, he received his wings and his officer's commission. But rather than sending him into combat, the Army kept him at Luke as a gunnery instructor. Dick Bong's war seemed to end before it had started. For almost 6 months after the American entry into World War II, Second Lieutenant Dick Bong was stuck stateside. As a gunnery instructor at Luke Field in Arizona, he trained other young fighter pilots and then watched as they departed for points unknown overseas. In May 1942, however, the Army Air Force assigned Bong to Hamilton Field in San Francisco. There, pilots were learning how to fly the new Lockheed P-38 Lightning fighter. The P-38s were big, fast, and had proven themselves unsuitable for combat in Europe. The cooling systems for the plane's twin engines froze up at low temperatures common at altitudes over Europe. The pilots training in P-38s at Hamilton all understood where they were headed: the Pacific. After arriving at Hamilton, Bong quickly came to the attention of Major General George C. Kenney, commanding general of the 4th Air Force. Bong was both a gifted pilot and an incorrigible hot dog. On training flights, he liked to dip down low and buzz San Francisco's downtown. Showing off for the civilians seemed to be his greatest joy in life, and it got so bad that General Kenney put out an official order that such antics would not be tolerated.
Well, as most pilots are prone to do, he disregarded that instruction and, in fact, went out and did a couple loops around the middle span of the Golden Gate Bridge went down Market Street waving at the secretaries as he was buzzing through town, and had gotten so low that evidently he blew down somebody's laundry. And that woman actually filed a complaint with General Kenny.
Kenny knew, of course, that Bong's juvenile clowning was not altogether a bad sign. There's a long tradition of cocky fighter pilots indulging their whims. Indeed, Kenny knew that confidence and spirit were traits necessary for fighter pilots to survive in combat. Still, he was a general, and generals have to at least attempt to keep a lid on their pilots. He disciplined Bong regularly, making him wash, dry, and fold the laundry he had blown off the clothesline, for example. But he also took note of the young pilot's enormous skills in the air.
He actually spotted the spark, I think, when he called him on the carpet in his office. He was, I don't know what he was expecting when this pilot walked in the door, but here comes this, average size 5'8", blonde-haired, baby-faced Swede who appeared to be scared to death that he was going to lose his wings.
Bong's passion for flight so impressed Kenny that when General Douglas MacArthur chose Kenny to set up the 5th Air Force Base in the Southwest Pacific, Kenny made sure that Bong was one of the first pilots sent to his new base in Australia. He arrived in September, springtime in the Southern Hemisphere. For more than a month, Bong sat around in Brisbane awaiting delivery of his plane. In November, Kenny assigned him to temporary duty with the 35th Fighter Group, based in Port Moresby, New Guinea. New Guinea at the time was a hornet's nest of Japanese aircraft. MacArthur's campaign to reclaim the Philippines had just begun. American forces were beginning the bloody harbor-to-harbor conquest of New Guinea. The Japanese were throwing everything they could at the arriving American forces. The Army Air Force used a kind of sink-or-swim training method, throwing green pilots into the periphery of battles to ready them for full-fledged air combat. Flying under the careful tutelage of an experienced combat pilot, Captain Tom Lynch, Bong flew long patrols and skirted air battles for nearly a month, learning from Lynch the best tactics for fighting in a P-38. Then, on December 27, 1942, Bong got his first real taste of battle. He was in a flight of 12 P-38s led by Lynch. The flight intercepted 40 Japanese aircraft over Buma on New Guinea's northwest coast. Badly outnumbered, the P-38s charged headlong into the formation. Bong showed no sign of the fear he surely felt. He scored a Zero fighter and a Val bomber. Altogether, the P-38s knocked down a dozen Japanese aircraft. Bong, who had never been in real combat before, earned a Silver Star for his actions. From that point on, in dependable, almost unspectacular fashion, Bong began to compile what turned out to be the finest combat record in the history of American aviation. It took him only until January to become an ace, scoring his 5th kill over Leh Harbor. In February, Bong left Lynch's shadow and returned to the 9th Fighter Squadron. On March 3rd, on the opening day of the Battle of the Bismarck Sea, Bong flew escort for a flight of B-25 and B-17 bombers attacking a Japanese convoy. Bong knocked down a Zero. The bombers sank 4 Japanese destroyers and 8 transports. 1 and 2 kills at a time, Bong upped his total. Kenny promoted him to first lieutenant and gave him a 2-week leave in Australia. By then, a double ace, Bong enjoyed his R&R but longed to get back into action. The Japanese were throwing thousands of aircraft at the advancing Allies, creating aces almost as fast as the Allies could get pilots into the air. But Bong, perhaps uniquely among American pilots, seemed more interested in the experience and challenge of flight than he was in his kill count.
He was an introvert on the ground, shy even. In the air, became a different person, became the ultimate fighter pilot.
On July 26, Bong had his best day ever. Escorting American bombers attacking Leh, he knocked down 4 Japanese fighters. General Kenny, who had been so impressed by Bong's skills in training, could barely believe how proficient a warrior the unassuming Swede had become. He put Bong in for a promotion to captain and filed an after-action report that resulted in Bong receiving the Distinguished Service Cross. Bong was, in fact, emerging as a leader in the almost unspoken competition among pilots to become the ace of aces. He became one to watch. The press started wiring accounts of his combat accomplishments back stateside, and his name started to be mentioned in speculation about whether an American pilot would break Eddie Rickenbacker's seemingly unbreakable record from World War I, 26 combat victories. In November 1943, Bong shot down his 20th and 21st enemy aircraft, a pair of Zeros over the airfield at Rabaul. General Kenny, knowing that his ace pilot was as valuable as a morale-building hero as he was in the air, gave Bong a 60-day leave to return home for a visit. Bong met with General Hap Arnold, posed for a few pictures, and then returned to Poplar, Wisconsin to enjoy, as ordered by Kenny, a little home cooking. The leading ace of the war was welcomed home as a hero, and while being crowned as honorary homecoming king at his old college, he met Marjorie Vattendahl, the 19-year-old homecoming queen. For the next 2 months, if he wasn't busy appearing at war bond rallies or launching ships for the war effort, he and Marjorie were together. By the time he left Poplar on the long journey back to the Southwest Pacific, he and Marjorie were in love. Captain Richard Bong returned to the Southwest Pacific as the leader in the race to become the ace of aces, in hot pursuit of Eddie Rickenbacker's combat kill record. Bong slapped his girlfriend's picture on the nose of his new P-38, which he christened Marge. 5 victories behind the record set by Eddie Rickenbacker in World War I, he went into battle with the whole world watching and an advantage over his competition. He was assigned not to the 9th Fighter Squadron, but to 5th Air Force Headquarters. In the competition to become ace of aces, the flyer with the most kills, Bong had become the favorite. The press had gathered to watch his achievement. While other pilots' assignments were limited to specific geographical areas where there might or might not be enemy activity, General Kenny allowed Bong to roam where he liked, in search of action and Japanese planes to shoot down. But they increased slowly. The number of Japanese aircraft had decreased, and the enemy was shifting to a more defensive posture. That limited the number of mass attacks that had created so many American aces. The Southwest Pacific was about as unnatural a habitat for the Wisconsin farm boy as it's possible to imagine. Hot, humid, bug-infested, and moldy, it was a place that seemed to reek of death. Bong went out almost daily, enduring long, boring patrols. Often he found no enemy aircraft at all. When he did, the combat lasted only minutes, and then a long return flight, often over open water, to inhospitable accommodations. That was his reward. On February 15th, the day after Valentine's Day, Bong recorded his first kill in the plane he'd named for the girl back home, Marge. It was his only official kill for the month, though he did destroy a transport as it sat on the runway. The transport, it turned out, was loaded with high-ranking Japanese officers, and while it didn't count on his kill total, it struck a significant blow to the Japanese war effort. On March 8th, the tedium of the war turned to tragedy. Bong had reunited with his former commander from the 35th Bomber Group, Lieutenant Colonel Tom Lynch. The two were flying over Atape Harbor, New Guinea. Bong watched helplessly as his old friend and mentor spun down to his death. For the next month, Bong was ineffective in combat. He flew, but he didn't score any kills until April 3rd, when he knocked down his 25th enemy aircraft. The press gathered in anticipation. The folks back home waited for word of Bong's heroism. On April 12th, Bong shot down 3 enemy planes in a single day, shattering Rickenbacker's record. The news flashed around the world. Rickenbacker sent a telegram congratulating Bong and promising to send a case of scotch as a reward. General Kenny, doubly pleased that the record had been broken by an officer in his command, sent a case of champagne. Back in the States, Middle America was scandalized that people would send alcoholic beverages to a pilot in a combat zone. To quell the uproar, General Hap Arnold made a big show of shipping Bong 2 cases of Coca-Cola. Arnold slipped the press copies of his personal note to Bong, stating that America's newest hero would certainly prefer America's favorite soft drink. Bong, still the cheerful, baby-faced kid from the North Woods of Wisconsin, was having a ball. What he didn't realize is that by becoming the ace of aces, he had become a national treasure, too precious to risk in combat.
After he broke Rickenbacker's record at 26 victories, they did everything they could to the point of sometimes setting him down or sending him back on, publicity campaigns and things like that back in the States to keep him out of harm's way.
He returned to the United States, went on a war bond tour, and most importantly, proposed to Marge Vattendahl. He didn't return to combat for 5 months, reporting to General Kenny in September 1944 as a gunnery instructor. He could fly, but he was only allowed to fire in self-defense. He defended himself a lot. He shot down 5 enemy planes in October and 3 more in November. Kenny suggested to General Douglas MacArthur that Bong ought to get the Congressional Medal of Honor. MacArthur agreed and forwarded Kenny's request up the chain of command. In December, Bong went to Tacloban to receive the Congressional Medal from General MacArthur himself. In December, Bong shot down 4 more planes, bringing his total to 40. General Kenny, who had bent every rule to keep Bong flying, once and for all pulled him out of combat. He shipped his favorite pilot back home, armed with a personal letter to General Hap Arnold and 6 bottles of Coca-Cola for the flight. Bong arrived back in the United States on New Year's Eve, 1944. He went to Washington, met with Hap Arnold, and participated in what seemed like an endless stream of public appearances, including a press conference with Eddie Rickenbacker. He broke away in February and returned to Wisconsin. There, in the Concordia Lutheran Church, he and Marge married. After his honeymoon, Bong received the plum assignment of flight testing the P-80 Shooting Star, the first American jet. He made 11 flights in the P-80, immersing himself in the theory and engineering of jet engines. On August 6th, he pointed the nose of his jet down the runway for his 12th flight. The plane rolled down the runway perfectly, but as it rose into the air, the engine flamed out.
Here's a guy that had, 200 missions, combat missions in the Pacific, shot down 40 enemy airplanes, was shot at on a daily basis, won the Congressional Medal of Honor, comes back to what's supposed to be a relatively safe stateside job, and dies in an accident on takeoff in an experimental airplane, the P-80, in California.
Dick Bong, the ace of aces, died the day the Enola Gay dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. His death, which would have made headlines almost any other day of the war, made barely a ripple in the public consciousness on that particular day. The bomb had dropped. The war Bong had fought in so heroically was about to end. As the whole world prepared to celebrate the end of World War II, Poplar, Wisconsin mourned. In tiny Poplar Cemetery, Dick Bong came home for good.
Of all the U.S. fighters during World War II, only one remained in production throughout the entire conflict: Lockheed's P-38, the Lightning. Thanks to its firepower, speed, and the reliability of its twin engines, this versatile and advanced design became one of America's most durable and valuable assets.
It was the best damn airplane ever built. As far as I am concerned, it was like flying a Cadillac automobile.
It was just an aviator's dream to fly in a P-38. It made the war in the Pacific.
We had very few planes that could keep up with the speed of the German planes or even the Japanese planes, so they needed something that would be able to be competitive.
In 1933, the newly restructured Lockheed Aircraft Company gambled its future on developing an advanced twin-engine aircraft it hoped would remain at the forefront of aviation for the next decade. To test the design, a scale model was built at the then staggering cost of $5,000 and sent to the University of Michigan for wind tunnel testing. During this process, Lockheed's executives met a young engineer named Kelly Johnson. His innovative aircraft design ideas so impressed the company that he was quickly hired. This marked the start of a brilliant partnership, helping Lockheed become one of the world's leading aviation companies. In 1933, the new project involved significant risks during uncertain times. Perhaps Lockheed's greatest advantage against failure lay in the human resource of its talented staff. Although the company was becoming increasingly automated, this was still an era when technicians saw themselves as craftsmen, and Lockheed's production teams embodied an old-school dedication with immense pride in their work. They also understood that the company's future depended on the success of the new multi-purpose twin-engine aircraft. For the model to succeed, it wasn't just a commercial airliner that was needed, but various types of military aircraft as well. From this basic model, several variants, including the well-known Hudson bomber, went into mass production. In some ways, global politics worked in Lockheed's favor. The rise of the Axis powers, especially Germany's rearmament, highlighted an emerging threat to world peace and underscored the need for expanding American air power. Soon, the U.S. Defense Department identified the need for a high-speed anti-bomber aircraft, but they set the specifications so high that few in the industry believed they could be met. Lockheed assigned the project to Kelly Johnson, who believed the required maximum speed of 360 miles per hour was attainable, but only by using an aircraft with the power of 2 engines. In fact, Johnson's design surpassed expectations, capable of reaching over 400 miles per hour. Normally, a twin-engine configuration would result in poor maneuverability, but Johnson countered this with a brilliant twin-boom design. This innovation secured a Defense Department contract in June 1937 to produce a single aircraft, the Model 22, at a fixed price of $163,000. Once again, Lockheed was taking a major risk. The prototype would end up costing 5 times that amount. However, this extra investment proved to be one of the company's best decisions. The Model 22 was officially designated as the P-38 fighter. With Europe on the brink of war, production of the aircraft remained highly secret. By January 1939, after minor modifications to the braking system, the new aircraft was ready for its first flight. On January 27, the first XP-38, precursor to nearly 10,000 fighters, took flight for the first time. Securing government funding for armaments was still politically sensitive, and the Army Air Force recognized the need for public support for the P-38. To garner this, they unveiled the project by announcing an attempt to break the Trans-America airspeed record. On February 11, 1939, the only P-38 in existence, with just 6 hours of flight time, embarked on its record-setting flight. Lieutenant Ben Kelsey was at the controls, with the American public and taxpayers watching closely. To cover the journey, Kelsey refueled at Amarillo and Brightfield before reaching Mitchell Field. These stops added about an hour to the total flight time, but the aircraft still completed the 2,490-mile trip in just 7 hours and 43 minutes, only slightly longer than Howard Hughes' previous record, which had been set in a specially designed plane carrying enough fuel for the entire trip. Unfortunately, during Kelsey's final approach to Mitchell Field, the aircraft struck a line of trees, crashed, and was destroyed. However, the plane's impressive speed convinced the Defense Department to immediately award Lockheed a contract for 13 YP-38s. The aircraft were to be equipped with a 37mm cannon and 4 machine guns, 2 30mm and 2 50mm, making it one of the most heavily armed fighters of its time. Within months, even more firepower was added, while interior design changes nearly doubled its ammunition capacity. Lockheed was now firmly in the fighter business, and the Burbank plant was restructured for mass production, resulting in approximately 30,000 minor design changes. Additional modifications were also required to reduce the buffeting and address a phenomenon known as compressibility, which caused the aircraft to vibrate during certain maneuvers, particularly when diving. The true solution to the compressibility issue wouldn't be discovered for several years, but these minor setbacks didn't slow the progress of what was considered the world's best interceptor. In September 1939, as Germany invaded Poland and plunged Europe into World War II, the Army Air Force ordered an additional 66 P-38s on the same day the first YP-38 made its maiden flight. From the outset, protecting the pilot with armor was a top priority. Throughout its service, the P-38 underwent constant testing to enhance its resilience against enemy fire, with pilot safety being paramount. The plexiglass canopy and armor plating around the pilot were rigorously tested with gunfire. In June 1940, the British ordered 600 of these impressive aircraft, naming them the Lightning. However, due to the secrecy surrounding the vital superchargers, they were only provided with a less powerful engine and aircraft equipped with propellers that rotated in the same direction. This hybrid version proved underpowered and difficult to handle, and the British accepted only 3 before dubbing them castrated Lightnings and canceling the order.
The British didn't like the airplane, and they had been in conflict for quite a while, and they knew airplanes, and they didn't want that thing, and it was a real dog. It didn't have some turbo, it didn't fly high, all the props turned in the same direction.
However, the name Lightning remained with the aircraft throughout its career. The American model retained the key features, including counter-rotating propellers that provided stability to the twin engines. Behind the engine was the critical General Electric supercharger, which transformed average engines into powerful units. By late 1940, Lightnings were rolling off the production line. These aircraft were exceptionally powerful, boasting a high rate of climb, long range, and the safety of twin engines, making them popular with pilots. Unfortunately, the compressibility issue continued to limit high-speed performance.
The P-38 was having a problem, credibility problem. Pilots or aspiring pilots had heard some things that weren't very complimentary about the P-38. Now, as young cadets, 20, 21 years old, we really didn't know what compressibility was at the time, but that was one of the rumors that the P-38 was a dangerous airplane if it hit compressibility.
In the early 1940s, pilot training began in 2-seater, single-engine biplanes, which were much lower in power. The trainee pilot always had an instructor present, but when a young pilot first sat in the cockpit of a twin-engine Lightning, he was entirely on his own. This created significant challenges given the plane's immense power. To address this, an awkward attempt was made to add a second seat in the port boom cockpit. More effective, however, was the piggyback concept. The radio was removed from behind the pilot's seat, allowing the instructor or trainee to crouch there, ensuring that the first-time pilot didn't have to manage the Lightning's intimidating power alone. The Lightning also introduced several unique features, such as a spoked steering wheel in place of the traditional joystick and dual-engine related controls for turning. The tricycle undercarriage was another innovation that pilots favored, as it made takeoffs and landings much easier than the standard tailwheel design. Landings were particularly safer, as the Lightning could land at higher speeds without risking a stall. During training, pilots were taught to always wind up the side windows, as failing to do so would disrupt the airflow during takeoff, causing severe buffeting from the resulting turbulence. New crews often worried about the dangers of bailing out of the twin-boomed P-38, fearing the rear elevator slab might act like a blade and strike them as they exited the aircraft. However, as this training film emphasizes, those concerns were unfounded.
Bailouts can be made either, 1, by turning the plane on its back and dropping out, or 2, by getting out the left window and sliding down the wing. Now don't stand on the wing to jump.
The quality of the training was soon put to the test. After the attack on Pearl Harbor, America entered the war, and peacetime pilots transitioned into combat roles. Due to its long range, the P-38 could be flown in stages across the Atlantic to Britain. A squadron was stationed in Iceland to protect the staging airfield and patrol sea routes, attempting to intercept German long-range reconnaissance planes that were attacking ships and guiding U-boats. Without radar, these efforts were typically unsuccessful. However, on August 15, 1942, a patrolling P-38 spotted a Focke-Wulf Condor, and Lieutenant Shanahan shot down the German plane within seconds, marking the Army Air Force's first victory against the Luftwaffe. Focke-Wulf also produced the stub-nosed FW-190, which is often regarded as the best dogfighter of the entire Second World War in Europe. Alongside the Messerschmitt 109s, these aircraft had a devastating impact on early 8th Air Force daylight bombing campaigns against Germany. Without fighter protection, the early B-17s were shot down in alarming numbers, and at one point, the entire strategic bombing campaign was at risk. It became clear that to continue long-range daylight bombing, long-range escorts would be necessary. The Lightning emerged as the obvious choice, and American fighter crews were eager to showcase the P-38's potential. However, those stationed in Britain were initially sent to support the more urgent North African campaign, delaying the development of the bomber escort program. Typically flying along P-47 Thunderbolts, Lightning pilots would receive briefings on fighter protection and coordinate with the 8th Air Force heavy bombers. Finally, Lightnings were set to engage the Luftwaffe on equal terms. The results of these early encounters were mixed. While the P-38 had impressive diving capabilities at high speeds, it was not as agile as the FW-190s at high-altitude engagements. Instead, the Lightning proved more effective at lower altitudes, where it could dive on German fighters as they climbed to attack B-17 bomber formations. A high-speed dive attack was effective for only one approach, but with the Lightning's heavy firepower, an accurate pilot could make it the best way to engage German fighters. In the skies over Europe, the Lightning earned the German nickname Fork-tailed Devil. The 8th Air Force's fighter escort operations were largely successful, resulting in significantly fewer B-17s being lost to enemy fighters. Additionally, it became standard practice for American fighters returning from escort missions to strafe enemy ground targets. In this role, the P-38 became legendary. Its long range and formidable armament made it a deadly ground attack aircraft. German airfields were prime targets, and American fighters employed the same tactics used by Germany against England during the Battle of Britain, attacking German aircraft where they were most vulnerable, on the ground. The combat experiences led to enhancements in later models of the P-38. This is a light G model, which featured an enlarged chin intake under each engine. Improvements were also made to the aircraft's armament, with the cannon and machine gun combinations often being varied to increase firepower. Additionally, the wing tank hardpoints were now being utilized to carry 500-pound bombs, proving that this aircraft, originally designed as an anti-bomber interceptor, could also effectively serve in ground attack roles. Flying low off the Californian coast, this late model P-38 tested a new weapons combination. The issue of compressibility, identified as the buildup of shock waves over the airframe at high speeds, was finally addressed. Special flaps fitted under the main spar were tested and eventually installed on all late J models and widely used L model. These flaps provided a nose-up attitude during dives, keeping the aircraft stable and manageable in various flight positions. With these improvements, Lockheed's powerful Lightning became a nearly perfect fighting plane. These L models, based in Italy, showcase the aircraft's capabilities. Like all Lightnings, their performance relied heavily on the General Electric supercharger. When an aircraft was scrapped for any reason, maintenance crews would salvage reusable parts, placing particular emphasis on the crucial supercharger. Even in a state of decay, this P-38 held value for the Allied war effort. Maintaining twin-engine aircraft was, understandably, more time-consuming than caring for their single-engine counterparts. The ground crew's dedication was as crucial to the success of operations as that of any pilot. This squadron was being prepared for a ground attack mission. The decision to carry either drop tanks or bombs depended on the specific requirements of the mission. In this case, long-range capability was necessary. For ground attack missions, 2 500-pound bombs would be more suitable. In reality, P-38s were capable of carrying much heavier bomb loads, and the F model could even deliver 2 torpedoes. However, it was the versatile 500-pound bomb that saw the most frequent use. Immediately following their briefing, crews would depart to fly their missions, embodying a mix of determination and camaraderie. Each man hoped that the mission would be no more than a routine hulling job, but they were all aware that it could be anything but that. Throughout World War II, pilots recorded their victories on the sides of their aircraft, serving as both a morale booster and an accolade. This practice, which originated during World War I, was common among the air forces of all combatant nations. Some pilots placed all their trust in their aircraft, while others relied on sentimental objects for luck. All personal effects that could fall into enemy hands had to be surrendered before takeoff, and until they returned, the mission was paramount. This remarkable footage, captured from a camera suspended beneath the wing of a P-38, provides a glimpse of what Army Air Force pilots experienced during a routine interdiction mission. Back at Burbank, the final stages of P-38 production were often carried out outdoors, taking advantage of the clear Californian weather. However, the main plant was anything but exposed. The Lockheed factory, like other production facilities on the West Coast, was considered a prime target for Japanese suicide attacks. Given the critical role of the Lightning in the war effort, the Defense Department went to extraordinary lengths to camouflage this essential facility. The main Burbank factory underwent an impressive transformation, with the entire roof designed to resemble a paddock with rolling hills and even fake farmhouses to mislead Japanese aerial attackers. The reconnaissance version of the P-38 had no armament whatsoever, as it was equipped with large cameras mounted in the nose and relied on its speed for protection as well as on its paintwork. Early in the war, the Army was approached by Mr. Samuel Cabot, who offered a paint that would make aircraft invisible at altitude. Initially, the idea was dismissed, but later, in collaboration with the Sherwin-Williams Paint Company, a product was developed that made the P-38 almost invisible when viewed from the ground. The haze blue camouflage proved to be a remarkable success, yet its usage has seldom been highlighted. However, pilots who flew reconnaissance Lightnings were well aware of its effectiveness. In this footage, one of the haze blue reconnaissance planes flies alongside the standard olive drab of the fighter. The P-38's role in photo reconnaissance, particularly in the Pacific, was arguably its most vital function. As soon as a plane landed, the camera pack would be unloaded and the film processed immediately, allowing tacticians to assess the situation without delay. Many of the war's most crucial decisions relied entirely on these photographs. Given the value of the intelligence gathered, the reconnaissance Lightnings likely saved more lives than any other piece of hardware in the conflict. An unusually colored P-38 named Yippee was the 5,000th aircraft off the production line. To celebrate this milestone, it was painted in a bright vermilion, with its personalized name emblazoned on the nose and across the underside of the wings. Despite the striking exterior, if you look closely, you can see that the interior still retained the conventional drab olive color. When Lockheed first submitted its proposal to the Defense Department, it never anticipated producing 5,000 Lightnings. However, by the end of the war, the total figure would nearly double that number. Another chapter in the story of this versatile aircraft was the Pathfinder program. In early tests, the armament was removed to make space for a second crew member, equipped with instruments to act as a bomb aimer, guiding other aircraft to their targets. This was only a developmental example where the concept was initially explored, using sandbags to mimic the weight of the second crew member. The program continued, and P-38s with specially enlarged forward fuselages, known as droop snoots, eventually entered production, providing excellent service as pathfinders. On the business end of the Lightning, the armament typically consisted of a combination of machine guns and cannons. The aircraft's immense firepower, combined with its ability to avoid shooting through propellers, gave it a significant hitting advantage over Axis competitors. At a Pacific base, a crashed C-46 serves as an improvised control room for the Twin Dragon Squadron. Here, a pilot inspects repairs to damage sustained from enemy gunfire before heading out once more on a ground attack mission. Not all targets in the Pacific were static. Japanese fighters could be both prey and predator. While the Zero was incredibly nimble, other Japanese aircraft were less capable. Captain H. H. Seeley, nicknamed Light Horse Harry, was a P-38 ace with 10 confirmed kills and 1 probable. However, the all-time Lightning ace with an impressive 40 kills was Richard Bong. Bong flew all of his combat missions in P-38s, and even the legendary agility of the Zero was no match for his almost uncanny ability to down enemy aircraft. Bong was awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor after his 25th combat success and returned to the USA in early January 1945. He went on extended leave and married his longtime fiancée before reporting to Lockheed in early June for duty as a test pilot, where he would fly the new jet-powered P-80. Tragically, with very little experience on the aircraft, he was killed in a P-80 that flamed out on takeoff. The date was August 7th, 1945, the same day the atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. The last of the Lightnings, the P-38M, was in many ways the most intriguing, a jet-black, radar-equipped night fighter. 75 were produced as modifications of P-38Ls. These aircraft prowled the night skies over the Pacific Theater, seeking out Japanese targets and protecting U.S. airstrips. Though they came late in the war and did not see much active service, when they did, they demonstrated the concept's viability, leading many enemy pilots to regret their effectiveness. To accommodate the radar operator, the piggyback concept was pushed to the limit, with a blister canopy added to provide a cramped space above and behind the pilot, where the operator would huddle, peering into a tiny screen. The guns featured special blast shields on the muzzles to prevent the flash from interfering with the pilot's night vision and effectively blinding him, while the radar was mounted under the nose in an external module. On the day Japan surrendered, over 2,000 more P-38s were on order, but only those that were under construction at the war's end were completed, as the remaining orders were canceled. In total, 9,923 P-38s were produced, but as production ceased, Lockheed's Burbank plant was already churning out the P-80, America's first production jet fighter, the very plane Major Bong had been testing when he was tragically killed. Within a few short years, the P-38 was being phased out of use. However, for those who built, serviced, and flew the Lightning, it will always remain one of history's truly great airplanes.